Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with our land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that the ground on which we live is the traditional territory of Caldwell First Nation, of the Three Fires Confederacy, and the original people of Point Pelee and Pelee Island, and its surrounding lands and waters, and that of the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot peoples. We recognize and respect the First Nations who are stewards of the land and waters of Turtle Island, and who have embraced this stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of other nearby First Nation communities and all original people across Turtle Island. Members of Council, any disclosures of pecuniary interest? No, there being none. Councillor Desjardins, are you online?
Yep, my video shut off though.
That's okay. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Thank you. Did everyone hear what she said? Sorry, Councillor Desjardins. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest?
No.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. The purpose of today's public planning meeting is to provide members of the public an opportunity to make submissions in a public forum with respect to the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan. Before I continue, can everyone hear me in the back okay? No. Can we turn this up at all? I'll be careful. Can you hear me now? Any better? Not really? I'm getting some no's. Okay, I will try to be as loud as I can and hopefully that better? Okay. The proposed Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan is a roadmap for how the Howard Bouffard area will grow in the future. It helps to inform future building locations, future land use categories, and what kind of nature to protect. The Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan helps plan for community growth while taking care of the environment. Two important things to understand about tonight's meeting. First, no decisions will be made at this meeting, as this meeting is an opportunity for the town to listen and gather public feedback. And second, administration will not be responding this evening to the comments that are received. The comments and feedback provided at this meeting will be considered in the context of the entire project, and it is anticipated that the final report with a recommendation would be brought to council for consideration in January or February of 2025. It is at that meeting that administration will speak to the comments received tonight, and public will have an opportunity to speak at that meeting on changes to the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan or to present new information. This project has been ongoing since June of 2023 with several follow-up reports regarding the natural heritage system, an emerging plan, and we also hosted a workshop and had many opportunities for comments by the public in the past year and a half. And if you visit our website, you can see the comment summary matrix, which is about 44 pages long. The plan's draft information package, which included the town-wide official plan amendments and implementing zoning bylaw, were published to the town's Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan webpage on August 30th of this year. On September 6th, the required public notice was sent out. We always hear feedback from our residents that we aren't taking enough steps to connect, so we hope this time we've covered all of our bases. And so for this meeting, it was posted on the town's website, published in the Windsor Star, posted on the LaSalle Post webpage, mailed to all property owners within the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan area, and to required agencies, which was about 1,000 letters. The information was also actively shared on the town's social media pages. Since September 10th, members of the public had the opportunity to register to attend, speak, and submit written comments for this meeting. Members of the public were able to submit written comments in advance of the meeting through a shared link on the notice and on the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan webpage. There has been good response to the public consultation process, and we have received many comments, both written and verbal, in response to this plan. All written comments received by noon this past Friday have been posted to the town's website for the public to access. Written submissions received after that deadline and until the end of this meeting will be reviewed by administration and circulated to council. For the benefit of those in attendance tonight, I'm going to provide a brief outline of how things are going to proceed through the meeting. First, we will hear from administration and the consultants retained by the town. Following that presentation of material, registered delegates will be given an opportunity to speak. And from there, those in attendance who wish to make submission will be given the opportunity to speak. All delegates, regardless of pre-registration, will be given 5 minutes to make submissions to council. Just a reminder again, administration will not be responding to the submissions made by the delegates. As mentioned earlier, the purpose of this meeting is to hear and to take in the comments from the public and then consider those comments in the context of the project. After the delegates have spoken, council will then be given an opportunity to ask any questions. I will ask that council make notes of their questions during all of the presentations and speakers, and you will be given an opportunity to ask all of your questions at the end. We ask that all attendees be respectful of each other and the speakers. I understand we all have different interests and views, but I also ask that you remain courteous in your comments and behavior. If someone does become rude or disruptive, we will ask you to leave. We would also ask you to please mute or turn off any electronic devices so as to not distract or interrupt the speakers. It is important to the town to hear all views, opinions, and submissions regarding the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan. With that, I am going to now turn it over to our director as well as our consultants. So Ms. Beggs, I'll have you kind of take the lead on that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for your introductory comments. So welcome to the statutory public meeting for the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan, the series of townwide OPAs, as well as the implementing zoning bylaw. That was a mouthful. So as the mayor had suggested, and just to build a little bit on what Mayor Meloche offered at the beginning, we have two objectives tonight. So the first objective that we are seeking to fulfill is to provide some background information on our approach to the secondary plan process, and to outline for council and members of the public the work that went into preparing the documents in terms of our strategy and understanding a little bit more how we went about the preparation of what we're putting forward tonight. We have a very unique secondary plan that balances sound land use planning principles with engineering considerations that are particular and unique to LaSalle. So we're hoping to share all the work that we've done with council and the public tonight. The second objective, and probably the most important one, is to hear feedback from members of the public, residents and landowners. So we have heard from members of the community leading up to this meeting. So we've had some substantial feedback on the plan and the proposal, but we're here tonight to hear more. So we're looking forward to hearing from our delegations and hearing how the plan has been received up until now. So I'll just take an opportunity to introduce our team here. I'm Gudrun Beggs. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the Town of LaSalle. I have Ron Palmer to my left. He is from the Planning Partnership, and he's the lead consultant on this file. To my right, I have Mr. Grant Kaufman. He is a biologist with LGL Limited and did all the natural heritage science that went into building and developing the natural heritage system. And then we have virtually Steve Schaefer from SCS Consulting, an engineering consultant that advised on the work, as well as Chris Sidler from Lee Transportation, who helped to substantiate the proposed transportation network that we're putting forward. So with that, let's get into it. Just to provide some more context and review of the project. So the secondary plan area is outlined in red, and it is generally bounded by Normandy to the north, Howard to the east, Laurier Parkway to the south, and Malden Road to the west. So this is the area that we looked at and considered. This is the boundary that council endorsed in 2023 for this exercise. It is approximately 940 hectares in size, and essentially it comprises most of the remaining greenfield lands that we have in our built-up boundary. It includes a number of existing uses, including the residential neighborhoods, the Vollmer Center, Sandwich Secondary School, and Seven Lakes Golf Course. So those are just some of the key features and amenities that are included within this boundary. And it also includes the substantial network of significant natural heritage features. So, you know, this particular boundary encompasses a lot of natural heritage features, and we recognize those features as very important to the town of LaSalle and part of our identity in terms of what it means to live here. So they are important features that need to be studied and considered as part of this process. Next slide. So the purpose of the secondary plan is really to establish a comprehensive policy framework that will help to guide new development in Howard-Bouffard. It is a growth management strategy that we're looking at implementing for a 20-year horizon. And the secondary plan provides direction for strategic choices to shape the future evolution of this area. The process was to utilize to the extent possible the planning policy framework that we have existing in our current OP. So we have a planning policy framework that we know works. We're not reinventing the wheel. We are tweaking and updating it to current standards. So probably one of the more significant components and the value of comprehensive planning is to do a coordinated land use planning exercise that evaluates transportation, municipal services, infrastructure, natural heritage, a mix of land uses, housing types, elementary schools, and a system for parks. So that's really why we undertook this work to begin with. So we were looking to implement a strategy that considered and evaluated and assessed all of those important elements and tied it into a growth management strategy for Howard-Bouffard. We are also looking to this exercise as an opportunity to amend the Town of LaSalle OP to provide Howard-Bouffard with an up-to-date policy framework that will guide future development over the time horizon of the OP. So I don't know if anybody can follow the legislative bouncing ball that is the Planning Act these days, but this is also an opportunity to take the new legislation and integrate some of those components into the Howard-Bouffard secondary plan so that it can become current from a legislative perspective. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Gudrun. That was great. Yes, that was a good introduction from Gudrun, particularly keeping in mind that the planning for Howard-Bouffard has been going on for over 20 years. This area has been part of the urban area of the town of LaSalle for a very, very long time, and in fact has had a secondary plan bestowing development opportunities on it for quite some time. The preparation of the new official plan recognized that it was time to rethink the strategy for future development here in Howard-Bouffard, keeping it up to date with ongoing changes to legislation and planning policies that are in effect across Ontario. So we are cognizant that this is and has been intended for urban, primarily residential development for over 20 years. We have been working with some constraints on the site. Gudrun alluded to them. We do have a limitation on the maximum amount of growth that can be accommodated here based on the wastewater capacity that is subject to an agreement with the City of Windsor. That is a fairly significant element of the planning process, making sure that we're linking the built form land use approach with the opportunities and the limitations of that wastewater constraint. We want to make sure, in accordance with provincial policy, that Howard Bouffard is a complete community that includes a whole host of residential unit types, including opportunities for housing types that can be more affordable. We also want to promote the idea that non-residential uses can be accommodated here in Howard Bouffard, and we've done that in a couple of different ways, which I'll get into a little bit later. We also need a park system. We need public elementary schools and other public service facilities.
Sorry to cut you off. Can you lean in a little bit closer to the mic? They're struggling to hear in the back.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll pull it closer. Is that better? I'm getting a lot of advice. However, this is about as close as I can get. I'll do the best I can.
Thank you. We'll also look in the back if there's anything we can do as well.
Thank you. The town has done a lot of work over the last 20 years here in Howard Bouffard. Not only did you have a previous official plan, secondary plan in place, but you've also done a lot of work trying to unlock the mystery of stormwater management here. In fact, we had an older environmental assessment which led into another environmental assessment that I think is now complete, and that puts in place a significant element of this plan in order to deal with stormwater management. So that was another unique element to this plan that has been integrated in terms of all of the work that you've done historically. With Grant's help and his firm's help, we've established a new natural heritage system which builds upon the historic natural heritage system, and based on the new information that Grant and his team have established and coordinated over the last couple of years. And of course, you also did a transportation master plan that has been fully integrated into this secondary plan. So again, not starting from scratch, lots of work done by the town already. It was time to put it into a package to guide development over the next 20 years. Next slide, please. Again, Gudrun alluded to this. This is not simply a secondary plan. This is a package of documents that together are intended to facilitate appropriate development within Howard Bouffard. My big binder here, notwithstanding the comments matrix, includes a host of documents that all work together to facilitate ongoing change. Change is not going to happen tomorrow. Hopefully it will start relatively soon, but it's going to take quite some time to see anything close to a full build-out. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be dealt with and a lot of work that needs to be done both by the town and by the development community to eventually see development happen on the ground. The first component is an official plan amendment. As Gudrun said, these are a few items that talk about changes to your new official plan that are intended to bring the plan up to date with some changing pieces of legislation, as well as some opportunities for expediting the development approval process. The secondary plan itself is an important part, but it relies primarily on utilizing the policy framework that was established in your new official plan. So while it is specific to Howard Bouffard, it does rely on many chapters of your existing official plan for the overarching policy framework and implementation strategy. The secondary plan includes a number of appendices. These are non-statutory elements of the plan, but are important to help staff and council evaluate development applications and to give advice to the development community articulating the kinds of things that the town is hoping to see through the development application process. I know it's getting close to Halloween. Is this okay for everybody? Sounds a little weird up here, but we'll go with it. Some of the important appendices are we have included some urban design guidelines. Again, guidelines intended to help council, staff, and the development community understand the kinds of development that we're looking to see here in Howard Bouffard. We have a concept plan. That concept plan is really a version of what used to be called the Emerging Preferred Plan. And it helped us identify the land use designations, as well as the proposed zoning elements. The stormwater management plan comes from the long-term ongoing work prepared by the town that deals with that important component of the technical aspect of stormwater management and how it's implemented in Howard Bouffard. And we've included a series of terms of references for a number of technical studies that may be required to support ongoing development applications as they work through the process. Next slide. Oh, beat me. There are a number of supporting documents. Of course, the Natural Heritage System overview that was prepared by Grant and his team. Transportation overview prepared by Lee Consulting. The class environmental assessment final report, which is one of those environmental assessments that was informing the stormwater management strategy. And of course, the second environmental assessment that was also dealing with that important issue of how to deal with stormwater management. Another interesting aspect, which is not typical of a secondary plan, is we've articulated a zoning bylaw amendment that essentially pre-zones the properties for development throughout Howard Bouffard with the inclusion of the hold H symbol. And the use of the H means that there are a number of studies, technical and otherwise, that are required to the satisfaction of the town before the H can be removed and development can occur. Next slide. I'm going to turn it back to Gudrun to talk about a summary of some of the comments we've heard.
Thanks, Ron. So as the mayor had suggested, in the lead up and in the run up to preparing the emerging preferred plan and the detailed options for consideration, we hosted a couple of workshops in January, as well as had several meetings with landowners and property owners so that they could convey their development aspirations. We also did a campaign via PlaySpeak and received a lot of feedback from our residents and members of the community through that online platform. And so this, I'm not going to go through them individually, but this provides a bit of a summary of the comments that we heard from the public. And then I believe on the next slide we have some of the comments that we heard from members of the development community. And so we could just toggle through to the next slide there. Thank you. These are some of the comments that we heard back from the landowners. And so it's really our job as land use planners to try and balance all of this feedback that we've heard from our community and the landowners with good, strong land use planning principles and come up with the best plan that we feel is adequate for the community. The plan that we're proposing tonight, we believe, is fair and reasonable, and it takes into consideration what we've heard thus far. So following this meeting, as Mayor Milosh has indicated, we will take back the feedback that we've heard at tonight's meeting, as well as what we've seen in terms of written submissions. And we will consider that in the context of the overall secondary plan that we've presented. So we'll be mindful of the feedback that we've heard. And when we come back in January or February, we will present something to council in terms of a consolidation of the feedback, what we've heard, the themes that we've pulled out, and how those comments have been addressed or resolved through the amended secondary plan. Thank you. Next slide.
Back to me. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the contents of the secondary plan are, and then, of course, the zoning bylaw. The secondary plan, as I said, is based on the principles that are articulated in the opening chapters of your official plan. However, the secondary plan itself focuses on three key elements, including sustainability, and that starts with the requirement to protect the natural heritage features as they were articulated through Grant's work, and to promote Howard Bouffard as a complete community where people can choose to live, to shop, to go to school, to go out to restaurants, and of course to utilize the Vollmer Recreation Center, an amazing resource. The second part is high quality development. LaSalle has a tradition of beautiful neighborhoods, and the goal is to carry on with that tradition, keeping in mind, however, that there may be some built forms that are a little more intense than what historically LaSalle has been accommodating, although it is recognized that you're getting more and more of that as time proceeds. Again, growth management and phasing are a really important part of the plan. We believe that it can accommodate quite easily up to 29,000 people. We're working on raising that based on the limitations of wastewater up to about 31,800 people. Obviously, those growth parameters are established in concert with the capacity limitations of the wastewater treatment facilities. It needs to ensure that development is phased over time. The best kind of phasing is infrastructure emplacement, and infrastructure including wastewater, road construction, and stormwater management will effectively ensure that development happens incrementally over quite a long period of time. Next slide. The plan is broken down into 5 sections, remembering, of course, that we didn't need to reiterate what's already in the official plan. This secondary plan is to be embedded in the official plan as a new chapter, so the entirety of the official plan is applicable, but there are some Howard Bouffard specific elements of this plan, starting with the natural heritage system. We've mapped and articulated a policy framework for the natural heritage system, which was not done in the previous plan, as we relied wholly on the work of the County of Essex. We utilize land use designations that are primarily in the existing official plan and only included policies where we were to be different than the policies in the official plan. We have added symbols on the land use schedule for schools, parks, and places of worship. We're not proposing new places of worship, simply recognizing existing one. However, we do need schools and we do need a park system. So those are identified symbolically. The use of symbols is a very flexible approach intended to identify where its preferred public parks and schools will go, and then they will be confirmed as the development process unfolds over the coming years. The last section is implementation and interpretation. That section builds upon the interpretation and implementation section in the official plan and adds new tools and opportunities that are specific to Howard and Howard Bouffard secondary plan. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Grant to talk about the natural heritage system.
Thank you, Ron. The natural heritage system is comprised of natural heritage features and areas of varying levels of significance. The features and areas that are most significant have been put into a layer called the environmental protection designation. And the idea is to protect those features within the secondary plan area. These features include significant wetlands, woodlands, wildlife and fish habitat, habitat of endangered and threatened species, as well as existing drains. Included with those features are minimum setbacks, and those setbacks are pretty much, they're not specifically dictated by the province, but they are widely recognized within the province as being appropriate based on the type of feature. So those have also been incorporated into the environmental protection designation. The second layer is the feature assessment and restoration overlay. And that particular layer is for other features that don't meet the criterion for provincial significance, as well as features that require additional studies in order to determine their significance and whether they should be included in the environmental protection designation or whether they can, I guess, ultimately be removed from the system because they don't meet those criteria. In order to determine the value of those features that are in the feature assessment restoration overlay, a environmental impact study would be required. And the environmental impact study would be triggered by any development application within the full secondary plan area. The level of detail of that particular study would be site specific or site dependent based on the feature that was present and the development application. Next slide, please. So when we combine the two layers in the secondary plan, we create this composite sketch. And this sketch, the dark green, shows the environmental protection designation, those features that will be protected. And the lighter green shows the feature assessment and restoration overlay. I should note that one of the drainage features, the West Cahill Drain, is a primary linkage north and south within the secondary plan area. So we have assigned a broader setback to that feature. Most features related to fish habitat or the drains get a 15-meter setback. For that one, we've identified a 30-meter setback. So the total corridor width would be 60 meters. And that recognizes the important function that that drain will have to connect natural heritage features from the north to the south. Thank you very much. Ron, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks, Grant. This graphic doesn't show up in the secondary plan or any of the submitted documents, but I thought it would be an interesting one to show to council to talk about what we were trying to achieve with the natural heritage system and the ability to enhance that system by connecting it to stormwater management facilities, parks, school sites, the Valmer Recreation Center, the golf course. They're not all public. However, the idea is that wherever there was an opportunity to use a park, a school, or a stormwater management facility to enhance the scale of and the accessibility of the natural heritage system, that we would take that opportunity. So the idea is that the green elements get bigger and wider. Interesting numbers on the side. Within the environmental protection designation and the feature assessment and restoration overlay, we're looking at about 27% of the gross land area of the entire secondary plan area. That is very significant. When you start looking at parks and stormwater, that adds another 9%, so up to 36. Schools, Valmer Center, and the existing golf course add another 17%. The only purpose of this slide is to talk about the extent and the connectivity between all of those elements. It's an interesting story to tell here in Howard Bouffard, and I think we have the opportunity to try and create something that is to the greatest benefit of the residents of Howard Bouffard in the future, including the residents of LaSalle, as a really important part of this new community. Next slide. As I mentioned, the plan really relies on the existing designations that are in the official plan. We have the residential district, which covers the most land area, and that is really a permissive designation that permits a full range of housing types: low-rise, mid-rise, high-rise residential. Importantly, we have the mixed-use corridor, which is the opportunity to accommodate higher intensity built forms, and that includes opportunities for residential apartments, as well as community uses and facilities, and importantly, retail, commercial, and service commercial uses and restaurants along the corridor. We have added some policy in the secondary plan that requires a specific percentage of gross floor area to be dedicated to that list of non-residential land uses. And I use non-residential on purpose because it includes retail and service commercial, restaurants, community facilities, and so on. It's not simply retail commercial. Next slide. We have an existing business park in a couple of locations in the secondary plan area. Those are retained. The shape is adjusted somewhat, but they are retained for the purposes that they were intended initially in the official plan. They are already zoned for those uses, so those remain. I have identified one component that could be considered for conversion to commercial uses, but that would be subject to a subsequent rezoning process for the consideration of council. We recognize the existing golf course. We recognize Vollmer Center, and we've identified those symbols that I talked about briefly before for parks, schools, and the existing place of worship. Next slide. This is the land use plan. So this is where the yellow is the residential district. Of course, we have the two shades of green. We have four shades of green: dark green, protected environmental lands. The next shade down is the overlay designation for restoration opportunities, and then we have the golf course and the Vollmer Center. Again, the yellow is for residential, non-restrictive residential. It permits all three types. The detail of how that will be distributed is provided through the zoning. And the mixed-use corridor in the purple color that identifies where we're looking for higher intensity forms of housing in a mixture with all those non-residential land uses. Next slide. As I mentioned, infrastructure has been a very important part of this work. We do include lots of opportunities for mobility options and active transportation, which include trails and bicycle paths. We talk a lot about water and wastewater as a fundamental element, and that includes, of course, stormwater management. And we also talk about public and private utilities. Again, these policies are very similar to what is already included in your official plan. Next slide. This slide identifies the transportation network that started with your transportation master plan. It does overlay an enhanced active transportation system, which would be the trails and bicycle paths. Those are typically linked back to the natural heritage system, stormwater management facilities, and of course the parks and schools. Next slide. Stormwater management plan, this of course comes from those 2 environmental assessments and implements the big solution for stormwater management, which we believe can effectively act as an opportunity, a linear opportunity to connect to stormwater management ponds, public parks, and the natural heritage system. There are a number of stormwater ponds identified. The actual size and shape of those ponds will be refined through the development application process and subsequent detailed engineering studies. Next slide. In terms of implementation, we have identified some requirements and opportunities for financial agreements. Some of the infrastructure is going to be relatively expensive and will require a lot of decision making in concert with the landowners as well as council. We have provided the opportunity to establish landowners group agreements, notwithstanding that may or may not actually come to pass. We've provided updated policies for site plan control based on the changes to the Planning Act. And of course, we talk about the process of pre-zoning and the use of the holding provision, which is the second part of all of this statutory work. In terms of interpretation, it's pretty straightforward. We include some policy references and how those are dealt with throughout the document, definitions and where they come from, which are typically provincial definitions, and introduce the various appendices that I talked about earlier. Next slide. Moving on to the pre-zoning. The idea of pre-zoning, and this is not typical of a secondary plan process. This is usually left to the individual developers to make their own application and go through their own rezoning process. At the beginning of this work, with the direction of staff and council, we said we would do a pre-zoning approach. And the pre-zoning approach means that we have identified all the developable properties and given them a zone. We have a lot of zones. They're from your existing bylaw. But the most important ones are the residential 1, residential 2, and residential 3, along with mixed use 1 and mixed use 2. All of these zones come with the hold symbol. That means that a developer can come to the municipality with an application to remove the hold symbol, and then the zoning is in place. That's an important expediting approach to the development approval process. The key is what is required to remove the H, and the removal of the H is linked to a host of additional technical studies related to proving the natural heritage system, making sure the stormwater management system works, showing how the development will connect to the wastewater and water systems, how the transportation network will be developed, and so on. Next slide. The list of studies that the municipality may request in order to remove the hold symbol include a planning rationale report, a block plan, urban design study, stormwater management plan, functional servicing report, and transportation impact study. In addition to those two, at the current time, all development applications would be required to do an environmental impact study and a study of species at risk. In all cases, the municipality, not all cases, in some cases, the municipality can scope the work that is required within each application for the removal of the H, depending on the complexity and scale of the development application. The only one that cannot be scoped is the species at risk, which is required to fulfill the elements of the ESA. If you have a question about that, I'll absolutely have Grant answer that for you. But certainly the goal is that all development is doing the environmental work to ensure that there is no negative impact on the natural heritage system. Next slide. This is difficult to read, but this is the proposed pre-zoning schedule. Properties that already have zoning have not been changed. Only those lands that are within the deferred urban zone today are given a new zoning category. And with the exception of the environmental protection areas, they're all identified with the zone and the hold symbol. Certainly we're hearing a lot of commentary about this map, and absolutely we'll be looking forward to going through those comments and coming to some conclusion on what this map may look like in the end. With that, I'll turn it back to Gudrun.
Thanks, Ron. So just wrapping up essentially the presentation then, we feel that what's being proposed and what we're presenting tonight is a very unique secondary plan. If I had $1 for every time Ron had said, this is a very unique secondary plan. It has some really interesting specific LaSalle issues that we're trying to deal with and manage, included but not limited to the upset limit in terms of the wastewater plant capacity. We're trying to deal with a very finite resource and be mindful of that, as well as the opportunity to integrate all of the work that we've done through the master drainage study. So it's very unique in that it doesn't just speak to land use planning, it also explores and tries to manage and assess some engineering considerations and integrates them into the secondary plan process. So with that, the next steps are to gather feedback that we're going to hear this evening and that we've received up until tonight. Again, no decision is being recommended this evening to adopt or approve. We are just looking to gather feedback and hear from members of the public in terms of how they feel, their thoughts about the secondary plan. Going forward, we are going to be working with administration and the planning partnership and the broader team to prepare a comment matrix that outlines all of the comments that we've received to date and all of the feedback that we've heard this evening, and how those comments have been addressed through the secondary plan process. Looking to present that information to council in the new year, hopefully January. We'll have to see how that shakes out in terms of what we hear back and how it needs to be considered in the context of the overall secondary plan, but that's the target date. And then following a favorable council decision, we would forward the document to the county, who is the ultimate approval authority for official plans, to the County of Essex for their approval and consideration. So with that, I will turn it back over to the mayor.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So at this time, we are going to go through our list of registered delegates. Each delegation gets 5 minutes. We'll let you know when the time's up, and we'll try to get you to wrap up whatever you're finishing. And anyone who has not registered will also get the opportunity if they wish to speak following those delegations. So I am going to start this evening with our first one, which is Mr. Peter Valente. If you want to come forward and do your presentation.
I don't know if it's on. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, or I should say neighbors and friends. My name is Peter Valente. I reside in LaSalle with my wife, Darcy, and my son and daughter. While I was trained by my late father, Ramo, as a realtor, however, I'm a real estate developer. Many of you in this room have worked with me on many projects in this area. I guess you can say I left my mark here in LaSalle, or in LA, as me and my friends affectionately call it, and around Essex County. My mark includes mostly subdivisions, homes, and condominiums, and with a little bit of commercial thrown into the mix. The first home I lived in was at the corner of Malden Road and Bouffard, in the Bouffard secondary plan area. This is why, most likely, this town, LaSalle, is so near and dear to my heart. I was born here and I live here. Now to the matter at hand. I am the president of Valente Development Corporation, Tuscany Oaks Limited, and LA Land Corporation. These three companies make up one of the largest landowners in the Bouffard disputed plan area. We have owned land here since 2001. The previous plan was approved, I believe, in 2004. My partners and I have worked very hard to develop these lands. However, very little development has happened in this area since 2004. And now we're here 20 years later, reimagining the development of this area. What do I see as a developer? I've seen the town of LaSalle grow and change over the years. I've seen Normandy connected to Disputed. Great decision. I've seen trails going into the woodland. Great decision. Now you can bike through and see this natural beauty. We sit in one of the most modern town halls in the region. Another great decision. And I've seen LaSalle grow to become the top town in Windsor, Essex County. And now it's time to imagine its future. Mr. Ron Palmer just said we're going to add 29,000 people to LaSalle. That's doubling the town, basically. So maybe we're going to turn it into a city. What do we have in LaSalle that no other region has? Trees and natural beauty. However, as great as that is, you can also get a stomach ache from having too much of a great thing, like candy. I was at your Truck or Treat event over the weekend. What a great family event. There needs to be proper planning for development and for trees. Where to save the trees and where the trees don't really matter. Like a hedgerow, for example. Those were just used to define divisions between farmers. Or where a road once stood, like the Bouffard Road realignment. Also, we need to be careful we're not overburdening one developer, for example, with a school, a park, and a stormwater pond, which are all public facilities. That will make it difficult for that one property owner to develop its lands. And we've been waiting a long time. I've reviewed the plans with my partners, and we generally like it. However, we have a chance now to make it better. Do you know what I believe makes a great development? When the town removes impediments to development. For example, we like the pre-zoning. However, perhaps you should be taking care of the archaeological right now as well, because that'll clear a path for the developers. And maybe the EIA if possible, because having every person come back and do an EIA on their lands when this can be done right now doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So when the town removes impediments to development, developments happen. You're the decision makers that get to plan LaSalle's future. If you do a good job, what's even greater is you get to see it happen right in front of your eyes. You have two talented planners, Gudrun and her team, and Mr. Ron Palmer, and I know they're listening. I've made some written comments that I was told you have in your agenda packages. Please take the time to read them. Let's not wait another 20 years. Let's keep LaSalle great and make it even greater. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valente. And we did receive those documents, so you're aware. I will now ask Mr. Angelo Sorge to come forward. Just the button.
Good afternoon. Madam Mayor, members of council and administration, thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening regarding our family's remaining land holdings with the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan area. We wish to address the lands east of Disputed Road at the western terminus of Fiorina Street, just south of Laurier Parkway. To provide some background, we have actively participated in the secondary plan and have consistently provided input. We are now seeking council support in maintaining the current land use designation residential on our lands rather than the proposed environmental protection designation. We fully support the proposed R2 zoning regulation for our property. Despite the proposed designation change, we have always made our intentions clear. We wish to develop and service our lands connecting Fiorina Street. Fiorina Street was required to be built on both sides of our lands as part of the creation of lots along Disputed Road and the former Harmony Lake subdivision, which is now the Laurier Horizon subdivision, which has been awaiting this connection. Our remaining land holdings now form a remnant parcel just distributed on all four sides with a stormwater management pond to the north and residential developments to the east, south, and west. As the surrounding lands have been raised to meet appropriate floodproofing standards, our parcel now sits lower, resembling a hole in a donut. This elevation difference results in seasonal flooding, as water is trapped within the last undeveloped parcel. At the request of the municipality, we have implemented interim solutions such as constructing drainage swales within the property, but we believe these temporary measures are inadequate and only serve as stopgaps. We understand that the municipality based its recommendations to change the designation on studies completed in 2015 to 2019. However, we believe that these studies are outdated and further investigation is needed to reflect the current conditions of these lands. Our land use planner has submitted a letter outlining these concerns to the town, which forms part of the public record. We respectfully request the council direct administration to maintain the existing residential designation for these remaining parcels, provide with the process of R2 zoning. Allow us to commission a new environmental report based on the current conditions of this land rather than relying on outdated studies. We anticipate this work to be started spring of 2025. Once again, we appreciate your time and consideration, and we look forward to receiving feedback from the administration soon. We are available to answer any questions if you may have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorge. I will now ask Mr. John Couthard to come forward.
My name is John Coulthard. I'm the president of 2442760 Ontario Limited. I'll refer to it as my numbered company, located at Howard Business Parkway in LaSalle. I'm here on behalf of my numbered company and ProPower Manufacturing Incorporated as the owner and current tenant respectively of the property and industrial manufacturing facility at 5000 Howard Business Parkway, which I'll refer to as the subject property. The subject property is located in the secondary plan area and is designated as Business Park. And it's currently zoned as Business Park, which permits industrial uses. I will be speaking to the BLG letter dated October 23rd, 2024, which should be included in your materials. As you may know, the subject property is designated a Class 2 industrial site as defined by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, which I'll refer to as the Ministry. For that reason, compatibility between industrial and sensitive land uses is a live issue for the secondary plan. The Ministry has land use compatibility guidelines called the D-Series guidelines, which apply to secondary plans. In summary, we are happy to see the progression of the draft secondary plan, and we suggest that a few tweaks are necessary to ensure consistency with the province's D-Series guidelines and to address land use compatibility. In the BLG letter, we have listed 5 recommended amendments to the draft secondary plan. These are summarized on pages 2 and 3 of the BLG letter. 1 is to identify the Class 2 facility on the land use map in the secondary plan so that the location is known and easily accessible to the public. 2, add 2 overlays to the land use map showing the separation distance and influence areas surrounding the facility pursuant to the D-Series guidelines. 3, insert a new compatibility and mitigation policy to prohibit sensitive land uses in the 70-meter separation distance and restrict them in the 300-meter influence area. 4, include the ministry's definition of sensitive land uses in the plan. 5, require compatibility studies for development applications in the influence area and update the terms of reference for such studies. In addition, if you'll refer to Appendix A of the BLG letter, we've tried to do as much of the heavy lifting as possible by providing the actual written amendments that the town could use to successfully employ those 5 recommendations. You could insert these changes in the secondary plan in order to ensure that it complies with the D-Series guidelines. In addition to the D-Series guidelines, the ministry's noise guideline, the NPC 300, is also applicable and would require the Type E and Type F warning clauses be required on title to new developments within the 300-meter zone of influence. We didn't directly address the NPC 300 aspects of compatibility in our secondary plan materials. However, this requirement should also be captured in the draft secondary plan. The town may already have preferred language for inclusion of warning clauses, but if not, we would be happy to present proposed language for staff to consider. These 5 recommendations will ensure that everyone in the secondary plan area or is adjacent to it is aware of these guidelines and the location of class facilities in the plan area. Ultimately, this will allow for better land use planning submissions in the secondary plan area. We'll address the ministry guidelines and will promote good planning and development in the secondary plan area. I mentioned adjacent to the secondary plan area because the 300-meter area of influence to the east and southeast of the subject property extends beyond the secondary plan boundaries and well into the proposed crossing view development lands, which are not included within the secondary plan boundary, but are the subject of ongoing land use compatibility concerns. This draft secondary plan is a great start, but it could be even better by modifying it with these 5 recommendations as shown in Appendix A to the BLG letter and to further ensure that the NPC 300 guidelines are also included. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Next, I have Mr. Suffield. No? Miss Rachel Mills.
Hoping that everyone can hear me better than before. So good evening, members of council, staff, and fellow residents. As you mentioned, my name is Rachel. Thank you for having me speak tonight and providing that opportunity regarding the Howard Bouffard Secondary Planning Area. I am a proud new resident of Harrow, only having recently moved from my family home in LaSalle, where many of my family still resides. I recognize the inevitable and welcomed opportunities for growth and development in this area. I also firmly believe that we share a vital responsibility to ensure this growth happens responsibly and harmoniously with our natural environment, as well as in alignment with the updated policies in the Essex County Official Plan. These policies guide us in prioritizing the natural environment, connectivity, and human development so that our community can thrive as it grows. Acknowledging the changes that were shared in today's presentation as well, we're at a critical point where decisions made now will impact not only the way we develop, but also the future of our unique ecological and biodiversity's health in this area. LaSalle has an abundance of natural assets, trails, forests, wetlands, and green spaces that provide immense value to both our community and the environment. However, these spaces are fragmented, and without deliberate action now, we will continue to see these further isolated and vulnerable. And this is due to deprioritizing nature and land use planning and development that we've seen up until this point. Recent updates to the County of Essex official plan have set a clear direction for the future. The plan's goal of no net loss and the aim for 15% natural coverage is a strong signal that the environmental stewardship must be central to our development planning. This is more than just a policy. It's a recognition of the role that our natural areas play in supporting biodiversity, mitigating climate changes, and enhancing our overall quality of life now and for future generations. As we consider the Howard Bouffard Secondary Planning Area, a traditional wetland, I encourage and urge Council to prioritize integrating these natural spaces into the development process and to honor the 3 layers of designation, including the restoration opportunities overlay that has been largely ignored up until this opportunity, working with the nature. Ensuring that these areas are effectively connected through wildlife corridors and green networks, which would allow for the ecological integrity needed for species to survive and their resilience. This isn't about preservation, it's about creating a thriving, interconnected ecosystem that can sustain our community in the long term while we have this opportunity remaining. While there's many routes to development, this may be one of our last chances to make sure that LaSalle's natural areas aren't just protected in pockets, but woven into the fabric of our town's future growth. I'm optimistic that with thoughtful planning, insights, and perspectives from local nature champions, and active community involvement, we can achieve a balance between development and environmental protection. Let's seize this moment to align with the county's vision and create a future where growth and nature flourish together. I urge Council to exceed the proposed bare minimums for natural heritage designations and to establish stewardship in this planning area to lead with a strong commitment to connectivity and cohabitation with the local species that call it home alongside all of us. With the neighboring Ojibwe National Urban Park as a source of immense opportunity and inspiration for us, we have a unique chance to create a long-lasting ecological connection and protect the natural heritage. Will we look back on this area with pride in the efforts that we took, or will we regret not doing more to protect the natural environment and the unique natural biodiversity that makes it special? Like I said, there's lots of opportunities to develop, and it can all be done within this area responsibly. So thank you to everyone who has put their time and effort into this plan thus far, and for the time and effort that will be put into continuing to better it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to call up Stacy George. Just hit the button on the microphone right there. Thank you.
I understand that there was a handout printed as well. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and members of Town Council. My name is Stacy George, and I'm a landowner in the Howard Buford area. On behalf of my family, under the group Markov George Properties, I'm here to express our concerns of how the proposed Howard Buford secondary plan, official plan zoning bylaw amendment will have a huge negative impact as us, as current landowners in this area. So if you refer to the handout, I've addressed it in summary in 3 large issues with the map indicating where those issues lie. So referring to our first issue, with the new proposed plan, the 17 30-foot lots we own on Gilroy, which would go from entirely one zoning, which is currently deferred urban, to being split between 2 different zonings. A quarter of our lots will be MU2H, that's mixed use 2 zone, and 3/4 of lots on the same street will be in the recreation zone holding, REH. In other words, parkland open space. This split in zoning will severely affect the ability to develop the land in the future. Our proposal feedback would be to have all our properties on Gilroy under one zoning, mixed use 2 zoning, MU2H, and move the parkland to another area in that region which does not contain currently subdivided lots on it. Currently, our property on Gilroy is completely zoned as DU, as I mentioned, and it's been cleared right now and freely farmed for the past 15 years. 22 years ago, when the official plan was changed, our property was still in a residential area with no mention of a proposed park or open space. There is a large wood lot adjacent to the property on the east side. We were very surprised that the new proposed change would have 76% of our land on that street now be zoned as parkland. To our knowledge, we have not come across any intended proposed park or open space on any previous registered plan of our land. When we purchased the lots 27 years ago, the land was already subdivided into lots and was zoned as future residential. Back in 2002, the Howard Buford secondary plan amendment had the zoning changed to deferred urban. Again, no mention of park or open space on the land. According to map 6 of Schedule F1 of the proposed Howard Buford land use plan, our Gilroy land in question was marked yellow as residential according to the legend, with a small circled and a proposed park. Now, I was a little confused because if I was just looking at the land use map, since it was marked yellow, I would have thought our property would still be residential and a small park would be placed there. It was only when we went into the planning department that we understood how large of a park would be intended and how much of our land was going to be parkland. Referring to issue 2 on my handout, we own an 80 by 110-foot corner lot on Palmer. Under the new proposal, this land would go from deferred urban to natural environment. Our neighbors directly across the street from us on the south side of Palmer have their property zoning under the new proposed plan, changing their property from deferred urban to residential 2 zone hold, R2H. The proposed road, according to Schedule F3, Howard Buford's Road and Active Transportation Plan, would separate our 2 properties, and our property would front on the road, but we would not be able to have the opportunity to develop it, as our property would now be a new natural environment zoning. Our proposal for issue 2 would be to have our property on Palmer be zoned from deferred urban, DU, to residential 2 zone holding, R2H, the same as our neighbor's property across the street, south of us, so we would have the opportunity to develop it as well. Lastly, if you refer to issue 3, we own 5 lots on Millwood, which would which have been zoned future residential for the last 50 years. My dad commented that's probably longer than some of you are alive. My parents have been paying tax on the property for over 50 years as vacant future residential. 22 years ago, the zoning was changed to deferred urban, DU. If the proposed plan passes, we'll have no opportunity to develop the property due to the proposed natural environment zoning. Our proposal feedback would be to change the zoning on our Millwood property from deferred urban to residential 3 zoning, R3H, to be the same as the proposed change on our neighbor's property just east of us, at the end of the same block of Millwood. This would allow our property to have the opportunity for development. In conclusion, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak of how the proposed zoning changes would negatively affect our family properties in the Howard Bouffard secondary plan area. We've owned these properties for decades and have been paying taxes on them as residential vacant land, as that's how we purchased the lots from the time of purchase. They've been always subdivided. We had the hopes of someday of developing it, and me personally to retire and build a house with my husband. He doesn't know that. Now, with these proposed changes, we have 24 lots listed on our handout. If they go through, out of those 24, only 4 of those lots will be able to be developed. We're asking Town Council to not approve the Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan Amendment as it stands, and to show your support for vulnerable small landowners such as ourselves against devastating proposed rezoning changes. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you very much. John DeMarco?
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for this opportunity to speak to you about the current draft of the Howard Bouffard secondary plan. I grew up in LaSalle. I now live in Kingsville, and I am a landowner within the Howard Bouffard secondary plan area. Next slide, please. So this, I think, is a historic opportunity. I would call it a once in 200 years opportunity, maybe the best opportunity in the whole history of LaSalle to plan an entire community with a vision to the future rather than continuing the past practice of piecemeal development. Next slide, please. Let's look back not too long ago, 200 years ago. Some things have changed, but it's still recognizable. There was a string of wetlands from what is now Ojibwe Park through Turkey Creek, through Howard Bouffard, River Canard, Big Creek, down to Lake Erie. In Howard Bouffard, you can't read what it says, but it's written on there, Cranberry Marsh in 1813. What happened to Cranberry Marsh? Well, we know it's been partially drained for farming, but not drained to the extent that you can build on it. That's why it's still mostly vacant land. Next slide, please. Now in 2024, this map is from the drainage plan. It is still a wetland. That red represents a floodplain. And within that, I didn't show them, there are provincially significant wetlands within that red area, and there would be much more, of course, if not for the disturbances that have taken place over the years. And what we should know by now, with climate change and so on, wetlands play a role. We should no longer be thinking that wetlands are just waiting to be drained. Next, please. So I'm already jumping to what a solution could look like. Let's let some wetlands be wetlands. And I think that decision is fully within the power of the council. The council is not required to drain all wetlands. The council makes land use planning decisions. We want to build here, we won't build there. We should designate a central core within Howard Bouffard, which would combine many functions. It would still be a floodplain, so it would provide for natural management of flood water, reduce the need for infrastructure, and it would also include many existing natural areas and allow us to reconnect those natural areas. We can call this environmental infrastructure. we should start with this environmental core, this environmental backbone, before we start filling in the houses on our monopoly board. Next, please. What would be the benefits of this blue-green core? I'm not going to read them all for lack of time. The list is very long. Probably everybody here could add to that list. I'll just highlight the one in yellow on the lower left. I believe such a plan would benefit developers and benefit the town because it would create certainty and allow building faster. Rather than deferring environmental assessments to the future, as one of the developers said a few minutes ago at this microphone, we should decide as soon as possible where we choose to build, where we choose not to build. Developers can go ahead and do what they do best and not be looking forward to more years of uncertainty whether they'll be allowed to build or not. Next, please. This is very important. We have an Essex County official plan. It's outdated. It's being updated right now. But the Essex County official plan has quite a strong environmental vision for Howard Bouffard. The colored layers are taken from the Essex County official plan. I drew the red outline of Howard Bouffard. And surprisingly, this map does not appear anywhere in the secondary plan or the environmental study. And this is our current natural heritage system, our legal natural heritage system right now for Howard Bouffard, and it's not shown anywhere in the plans. And that's an interesting question, why this information is not presented to the council, the public, or anybody. It's a pretty good vision. It could be improved, but if we allow ourselves to be inspired by this, then I think we can do something great. Next, please. What does this plan do? It actually, I use the word there, massive attack. That sounds like harsh words, but factually speaking, this plan would build on numerous areas that are within our current legal natural heritage system, including a smaller area of natural environment and very extensive areas of restoration overlay. Without ever mentioning the fact, let alone justifying it, this plan would build over many of those restoration areas, and they would have the effect of fragmenting what we're supposed to be reconnecting. So those remaining natural areas, which are so precious, we would build houses and roads in between them, permanently breaking them into smaller blocks that are not viable. That is the effect of this plan, and I know you haven't seen a map showing that that's what's happening. Next slide, please.
Mr. DeMarco, I just want to let you know your time is up if you could wrap up.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Well, there's a lot within my presentation that I hope you'll take time to read. This one shows where building overlaps with environmental layers. If you read through the rest of the presentation, I point out that there are what I call fatal flaws in the plan. Those sound like harsh words, but I think the decision makers should hear the message without any dilution. So I encourage you to look at the details, and of course I'm available for further discussion. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DeMarco, and all members of council do have a copy of your presentation. Amy Farkas? Is Amy here? Okay. Patricia McGorman?
Good evening, members of council and members of the community. My name is Patricia McGorman, and I'm here this evening to express some concerns with the proposed official plan that's been put forward to the public. My background is diverse in resource management, from farming, forestry, and other aspects of resource management in the natural heritage field. This slide I chose to depict what we have today from a Google Maps perspective, to look at Detroit, how much are we paved over, and even looking at Leamington and development. And this will be more applicable in a future slide. So if I get the next slide, please. So this is the secondary plan defining this area, and we look at it without all the lot divisions that have happened almost back in the 1930, I believe, preparing for a steel mill to come into town and a lot of development. And part of that worked to help to save some of our natural heritage because it wasn't developed upon, because the lots were small and they were unserviced. So a blessing in that respect. Next slide, please. As we know here, we live in a nice, mild climate. What's known in this area from Toronto, basically Toronto South, is called the Carolinian Life Zone. It is a very small area. It is only approximately 0.25% of Canada's landmass, yet it is home to 25% of Canada's population. That is huge. Next slide, please. This is a soils map from 1949, and this study was started in 1914 by the Agricultural College of Ontario. It's important here to recognize that a lot of the soils here are sandy soils and capable of growing many, many different crops, a variety of things that can sustain our populations well into the future. Unlimited if they're well managed. Next slide, please. So the arable land in Canada, coinciding with Ontario, is reported by the World Bank collection as being 4.5% approximately, and that's all of Canada. That's a very small amount. And then I'm going to read the OFA statement. Although Ontario is a large province, only about 5% of our land is suitable for growing crops or raising livestock. Much of northern Ontario can't be farmed because of the cool climate and the rocky Canadian Shield, and towns and cities dot much of the Ontario landscape. Next slide, please. What we have here from an ecological perspective, we have a great diversity, and part of that saving from that steel mill that didn't happen. And what we have is a region that is the most biologically diverse in our nation, and what it also supports are pollinator species. And I know that people may be not thinking about the butterflies and the bees, but they do pollinate our crops that are essential for our survival as well. So when we take out parts of these, we remove those securities from ourselves, because if we're relying on one species to sustain us, we know the impacts of what one invasive species can do, and we could use possibly the emerald ash borer that's essentially wiped out ash trees as a canopy species as we know it. That was severe, very severe. I thank you for this opportunity. I ask Council and the planning staff to look very closely at what you're doing. What you're doing will affect generations to come, generations that won't remember who we were, but what we did. We have that opportunity today, so I thank you for looking closer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one more time, if Mr. Suffield or Ms. Farkas is in attendance, they can come up. No? Okay, is there anybody here this evening who would like to come forward and speak regarding the Howard Bouffard plan? If you do wish to come forward, please have a seat and give us your name and address. No? Okay, I'm going to now give members of council the opportunity to go through their list of questions, and who would like to go first? Anyone? Councillor Carrick.
I don't have so many questions as some comments, so I'd like to thank everybody tonight for coming. I think some really good input on the directions and what was brought forward by a lot of people out there. And I think our job is to find a balance, a good mix. And I think this Howard Bouffard secondary plan is very complex. It's going to take some work, and I would just like, there's actually a question though. In regards to densities in the certain segments, how are we looking at that? Like, some people are told they're not going to be able to develop, so how are we adjusting to that? That would be a question, I guess, for some clarification, if that's appropriate at this time. If not, I can wait.
Through you, Madam Mayor. You're right, it's very complex. The allocation of development potential is articulated somewhat in an appendix to the secondary plan. I'm just trying to remember what we call it. It's the wastewater capacity allocation approach. And that is based on looking at the sub-watershed districts that were defined, looking at the proposed zoning that is articulated, and making some assumptions about the forms of development that are likely to happen there. So we went through all of the sub-watersheds, looked at the zoning, and applied an estimate of what we thought was the appropriate build form that would ultimately be built in each one. There are some elements of flexibility within that, but the idea is to allocate based on the wastewater capacity that you have available in a fair and reasonable way based on the zoning that is proposed.
Okay, thank you. So I don't have really too many more questions, but I look forward to all the responses that were brought forward to see how we can interpret or maybe move into the Howard Bouffard District Plan. So I will await that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Deputy Mayor Capata?
Thank you, through your worship. And one of the things that I've heard a number of times, and I've noted it in a number of presentations, is the number of megaliters required for wastewater to service a new area. I want to make sure that I understand the build, the number of megaliters, the capacity we have now, and what the infrastructure will be to support what we are looking for. And I see you smiling, Ms. Beggs, because it's every time somebody said it, I put a little hash. So I have hashes in almost all of the developers' presentations, the number of times that you've said it, and I just want to make sure that I understand what the end result will be and where we are now for that expansion, that differential between where we are and where we need to be. That's my first question, Your Worship.
Thank you for the very specific question, which I'm going to pass over to Mr. Osborne.
Thank you. Through you, Your Mayor, or Madam Mayor, we currently have 5 MGD, which is million gallons per day of sewage treatment capacity in Windsor. So when we look at the numbers in the Howard Bouffard plan, there's kind of a low end number, and then there's a higher limit number. So with that lower number that's in there that I think is around 22,000 people now, that's with the existing capacity that we have at the City of Windsor, which is 5 MGD. The upper level limit that's in the Howard Bouffard secondary plan, which is around 32,000 people, would be us having to procure another MGD from the City of Windsor. So the capacity that we have versus the capacity that we need both fit into this plan, but it's on the town to go procure that additional 6 MGD. As far as the infrastructure goes, we have the infrastructure in place to convey the sewage there. Outside of Howard Bouffard, obviously the infrastructure has to be built within as development progresses, but the infrastructure is there to get it to Windsor. It's just getting that extra capacity from Windsor.
Thank you, Your Worship. My next one. I've heard a couple of people talk about species at risk, and again, never having a piece of land that I've had to do it. Is it possible with the current legislation, as I believe Mr. Valente described, to do an impactful area study, or does it have to be done block by block? Because as I've listened to the folks here, when we start to talk about the speed of development, I know we don't want to rush, but I'm very much aware of the staged steps that have to take place to get these packages in line. And I just want to make sure that we don't defer, or if there's a way to do it properly at speed. Is there a way that people can get together, or does it have to be my plot, my neighbor's plot, or can we do an entire area from your perspective?
Madam Mayor, there is such a thing as a comprehensive EIS, and you can do that over a much broader scale, and you can certainly address species at risk as part of that much broader EIS. The problem is the time it takes to do that big study, the expense associated with that big study, getting all the participants to agree to doing that type of comprehensive study presents a real challenge. So what many municipalities do in order to reduce costs and time and so on is to request an EIS on a site-specific basis as the development application comes forwards. So your question is valid. It is possible to do it, but it is a major undertaking to do that type of study.
A follow-up to that, Your Worship? But if myself and my partner or the adjacent landowner had said, we want to develop, we could do it collectively together. Is that possible? And then my neighbor to the other side could say, I'm not ready to do it, and she could do her development later while the two of us pooled together to get it done?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Absolutely. The goal, as Grant articulated, and I think you were getting to in your question, is that it's absolutely valid for adjacent landowners to work together on a whole host of matters, including the environment. The key is that we want the detailed studies to be done in a reasonable time frame linked to development. This area is going to take quite some time to develop. 20 years is the estimate in the plan, but it could in fact take longer than that. There's a lot of potential here. So we want the studies to be done concurrent to the development application process so that the detail is there and it's relevant for the time when the studies are done.
One final one, Your Worship. We talked about removing impediments on the other work that needs to be done. I just want to make sure again that I understand what some of these impediments may be, so that when I meet these folks at ZERS, that I can explain what we've done here so that I understand what may slow down the process, so we can't do it in that timely fashion based on the development that these folks have come and talked about.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Again, an excellent question. I don't look at them as impediments, but rather simply requirements to make sure that development is done correctly. They're typically technical requirements, how you're going to deal with your site-specific stormwater management work. Archaeology was mentioned. Again, the municipality could do a broad-based archaeological overview, but again, the level of detail as you drill down into a site-specific basis is a different kind of technical work and is appropriate site-specifically or area-specific if there's more than one landowner proposing development at the same time. Certainly, I don't see it as impediments. That it gives the development community the absolute control over who they hire to do the work and how fast that work gets done. And it's simply to promote and fulfill the requirements to make sure their development is done appropriately.
Thank you, Worship. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Renno.
Thank you, Worship. My first one is to Ms. Beggs. I just want a better understanding. Will every one of these properties, if the plan was to pass next week or whenever it passes, we talk about the H holding. Will every single property go to an H and then need to be changed, or are there some that will be grandfathered? What does that process look like?
Thank you for the question. So we are looking to apply the holding provision to every property. And what that does, just building on what Mr. Palmer was suggesting, is it provides timely decision-making and focused approvals. So we're not looking for justification to support the ultimate intended use of the property, but rather the properties are subject to specific studies that may get triggered as a result of the nature and scope of the development. So it's a much lesser process than it would be to go through a full rezoning amendment.
Okay, thank you. And also on that same subject, sorry. Yes, with the new planning rules that change every 5 minutes, I think it was mentioned, we used to have meetings to remove the H. Is that still a function of council, or has that been taken and given to administration through any new rules?
Thank you for the question. So provincially, it hasn't been delegated. We haven't been granted the delegated authority for H removals. But as part of this process, in an effort to streamline development approvals, we are requesting that we put in policies in our OP in order to allow us that opportunity. So the Planning Act mandates that certain policies have to go into your official plan if you are looking to delegate those permissions. And so as part of this process, we are asking council to allow those policies to go into the OP, and then we will come back with an amendment to the delegation of authority bylaw to request that additional permission.
Okay, thank you. My next question would be to our environmentalist. In particular to one of our delegates that talked about going from 24 lots down to 4. I'm just wondering, has there been any substantial changes to her land? Has there been anything that we found out through studies? What caused such a change in her particular situation?
Yes, Madam Mayor. The criteria that we used to identify natural heritage features was applied consistently across the entire secondary plan area. And those criteria were fairly well established and applied equally. So we didn't go and look at who owns what property, where the property line was, whether that affected development potential on a particular property. We looked specifically at the natural heritage itself, and it fell out where it fell out. So I cannot answer specifically whether a change would be warranted on a particular property. We feel fairly confident with our delineation and assessment of natural heritage features and their significance. But as we find, natural heritage features don't respect property boundaries, lots, any of those things. So we have to go with what we're given. And it's unfortunate if it potentially removes some lots from consideration, but we have to treat it fairly, and it has to be equal across the whole study area. We can't play favorites. So I think, I can't comment specifically on the one landowner and how that impacts them, but I think I can comment on how we applied the criteria to say that we did it fairly across the whole study area.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully that addressed your question.
It did.
Councillor Burns.
Question to Mr. Grant. The golf course you changed to environmentally significant. And I guess my thought is this. I've worked at golf courses. I've played golf courses. If you make that designation environmentally significant, how do they brush and keep their golf course playable for individuals who like me who like to play a golf course? As I understand it, they wouldn't be able to do anything. That would be my question, sir.
Thank you for that question, Madam Mayor. It's not the entire golf course that we've identified natural heritage features on. It's specific woodlands within the broader golf course area. And as I mentioned in my previous answer, we applied criteria equally across the whole secondary plan area. And two of those particular woodlots met our criteria for significance. The other ones were identified as other woodlands and would require further assessment to decide whether or not those would be included. But we did not make any kind of an executive decision on what should or shouldn't be in, because again, that would be playing favorites, and that would be not applying the criteria equally across all lands. So I don't know how do you have a follow-up question, or have I explained that properly? To your
In my
satisfaction?
mind, no, but here's my follow-up.
Okay.
I hit my golf ball, it doesn't matter where it goes, significantly into a environmental area on a golf course or a non-one into the pond. And I understand that if I hit it in the fairway, I would never be there in the first place. But I am just wondering how you are going to handicap a zoned piece of property today that has been allowed and zoned in the past by myself as a member of council. And to some of you, I'm over 50. And I've been here a long time. So you can try to answer that one, and then I'll have a follow-up for my friend. Thank you.
I think maybe we should look at that one further and discuss it amongst the study team. I've given you the best answer I can give you tonight, but I think maybe it may warrant further discussion.
Through your worship. Thank you very much for that answer, and that's my number one concern.
Okay.
And then in this document to Mr. Palmer, no, right? Yep. Thank you. It does say here, those landowners who have then had the opportunity to make an application for a zoning amendment that better aligns with their development aspirations. No, that's not it. Some can stay out of this if they don't want it. If I don't want your new zoning, I can keep the existing. Is that right? And if so, how does that affect your new plan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I was hoping somebody would ask me that question. And no, I'm not a golfer, notwithstanding my name. I've done a lot of underbrush clearing in my day. At any rate, the idea of pre-zoning is to give those landowners who are comfortable with the approach that we've taken to carry forward with the approach that we have taken. Those that are not comfortable with the pre-zoning approach, they don't like the zones, they don't like what we've done, more than happy to remove them from the zoning bylaw amendment and give them the opportunity to make their application for zoning as they prefer it. Of course, we can do that. However, the idea of the wastewater capacity allocation still needs to be considered. So we can do one thing, but there are still other elements of the plan that need to be fully considered. And of course, council, as the decision maker, has that opportunity when an application comes forward. No one that I'm aware of has made any application at this point. However, I'm happy to allow them to make application on their own. Go ahead.
just to add to that, Councillor Burns, you know, you mentioned how do they let us know? All they have to do is let us know by email, by phone. If they don't want the pre-zoning, they can be removed, and it's not of any detriment to the project, and it doesn't hold us up in any way. So if they don't like what we're putting forward, they just have to tell us, and we'll take them out of the zoning.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up, so anyone here who had zoning on one side of the street is residential and there's environmental, one woman has said that 2/3 of her property would be affected, could easily do that then. Again, I don't know what the outcome would be, but she could easily do that.
The issue of the environmental component is that the secondary plan is the original designator of the natural heritage system, and zoning amendments have to conform to the official plan. So it's not as simple when the natural environment is involved in the rezoning process. That would also trigger the need to do an official plan amendment along with the zoning bylaw, supported by the same study, the environmental impact study.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Richo Spagnolo.
Thank you, through you. So one of my questions was already asked by Deputy Mayor Akpata in regards to the timeframe and what area would be able to build first. So I think you pretty much answered that, or unless there's something else you need to add to that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, timing is a complicated question. Certainly the aspirations of the landowner are front and center. The vagaries of the marketplace are important in that consideration. But here in Howard Bouffard, we have some significant elements of municipal infrastructure that need to be built. My expectation is that some lands do not require the big solution to stormwater management. Some do. The decision to build the stormwater management facility, the big solution, will have a lot to do with the timing of development on those properties that require it. Some properties could develop relatively quickly, however.
And then just a question for Mrs. Beggs. For tonight, for the residents that are here this evening and also our delegations, will they be invited back for the next meeting? How does the communication work for them to get their responses and their comments and their feedback and the responses from those?
So this meeting is the official statutory public meeting under the Planning Act. When we bring the report back to council for consideration, it will have the matrix that outlines the comments received and how they've been addressed. That isn't a public meeting under the Planning Act, but certainly there's always the ability to register as a delegate.
Sorry, I understand that part. I'm just wondering, will they be notified which meeting it will be, so then they can know if they want to attend and hear the feedback and the comments from Mr. Palmer and yourself from their questions and comments?
Sorry, yes. We will be posting all the information to the project website, and we will also be publishing it on the council agenda, so they'll be able to find it that way.
Okay. Councillor Desjardins, do you have any questions?
I did, but they've mostly been answered. I'm just, I was curious about the timing of the stormwater preparation work and where that would start. Is there a particular part of the Howard Bouffard area where we're going to start the stormwater, or will it depend on when the developers want to get started because they've already been waiting for a while?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Desjardins, through you, Madam Mayor. I'm guessing that Councillor Desjardins is referring to the master drainage study, which has been referred to as the big stormwater management solution. Certainly that is a large project. The town has attempted a number of times to apply for a grant for that, in trying to lessen the burden on the benefiting parties for paying that, and also the taxpayers for paying for that particular solution. It's a complicated answer. If council was to provide the resources, that can happen whenever. If developers come forward and start to contribute money, that can happen when that happens. And so there is a number of moving parts to that particular item. It's a matter of a number of different jurisdictions, different municipalities that also contribute to that. There isn't a clear indication, but or a clear answer at this point. We're still in the process of finalizing that study as well. So there are a number of moving parts, but certainly once the report has been finalized and cleared all its final hurdles, then council will be in the decision, and administration would come back to council with a plan to move forward and how that would move forward, and where and how it's funded and things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. I know that we've been applying for different grants and so far not successful, and I'm sure that our team will continue to be applying. I was just curious about when we might see some of this work started. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just have a few. One was asked by Deputy Mayor Capata, which was really about the EIA, because it was mentioned by Mr. DeMarco as well as Mr. Valente about the need to get some of that work done ahead of time. But from the sounds of it, it's extremely expensive. It's would require agreement from all landowners, which I can't imagine is easy. So is there another option? Is there something else that we can do? Because I did also listen to Mr. Sorge, who commented that he felt some of the studies were out of date from 2019. I know we did the natural heritage study in 2023. So what other items can be done for an environmental assessment that maybe would lessen the need down the road? Is there anything else we could do at this time?
I'm going to start. I'm going to hope that Grant backfills my answer. The environmental work starts at a high level, and that high level assessment is usually perfect for an official plan. Then we drop down a level of detail, and that's what we've done in this process, and that level of detail is appropriate for a secondary plan. You'll note the policies in the secondary plan always allow the designations and the boundaries of those designations to be challenged through the environmental impact study requirement. That's one purpose of the environmental impact study, and it's much more detailed. The level of detail that goes into that is there's usually staking of boundaries on site, 12-month inventories for species at risk. So you can start to think about how significant the work is just to get all the science to support the environmental protection that we're looking for. It's not typically done by a municipality. That level of detail is typically done through the development application process. I have seen some municipalities identify 3 environmental firms that they recommend be used because they've worked for the municipality in the past and you have confidence in the outcome. But I've not seen many instances where the municipality has actually done that level of detail. It's very complicated. It's a lot of work. It requires written permission for access by every landowner. It's simply part of the development approval process.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So it sounds like more or less it would really delay any form of development in the Howard Bouffard area if we were to try to consider something like that. And you did also mention earlier in the presentation that not all lands would be required for the EIA, but the amount of information or the type of study may be less for some areas over others, which would allow those hopefully to move forward a little sooner in development, right?
Back to you, Madam Mayor. Absolutely true. What we had initially thought about was doing another overlay that would be within 120 meters of the boundaries of the environmental protection designation. When we did that mapping, it covered almost the entire secondary plan area. So we felt it expedient to identify all development required to do that study, but add the opportunity for staff to scope the terms of reference for that work to make sure that it was appropriate for the scale and complexity of individual sites.
Thank you. Continuing on natural heritage, Mr. DeMarco did mention that the current natural heritage system map may be different than the newly proposed one. When you come back in the new year, would it be possible to get a comparison of the two?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's definitely something we can look at doing. And I think, yeah, I think that would be appropriate to compare the two so that council and Mr. DeMarco and members of the public can understand the differences.
Okay. And then the other thing I had in the natural heritage piece that I did want to comment on, because I know, I believe Ms. Mills mentioned the wildlife corridor. And when I look at the maps, I see a corridor. So am I missing something that's not there? It looked like there was a connecting piece that would allow wildlife to go really from Normandy all the way down. And I'm unsure if maybe that was misinterpreted. Did I not read that correctly?
Madam Mayor, yes, there is a corridor. There's a lot of debate within the scientific community on what is enough corridor, what's an appropriate width in order to facilitate movement by certain targeted wildlife species. And more is always better. However, it's a trade-off because a wider corridor will impact more landowners and so on. So it's trying to find a compromise that works for wildlife, but will also not create undue hardship for landowners. And the main north-south corridor, we established a 30-meter setback from each stream bank. So it's a minimum of 60-meter width, which is 200 feet, which is fairly well recognized as being a substantive corridor that will allow wildlife movement by most species. So I think that's probably a justifiable corridor. More is always better. But I think we've done what we can to balance the requirements of wildlife and the requirements of landowners.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And that actually works perfectly into the next question. You said hardship, and so a comment made earlier was, have we made sure that hardship hasn't been put onto one landowner? So that landowner is going to have, in any areas, schools and stormwaters on their property. Have we made sure that that hasn't negatively impacted one individual that way?
Back to you. We have to have parks. We have to have stormwater management facilities, and we have to have schools. We've been working with the school boards to try and find appropriate locations. Parkland, again, a fundamental element of this community, and we're trying to connect it, use it as a connector, widening the natural heritage system when we can, connecting it to stormwater, trying to create a green system. We tend not to do a plan on the basis of property ownership. We recognize that it does impact people in a different way as we work through the process. That's why on the schedule of the secondary plan, they are symbolic. There's a lot of flexibility built into the plan about the scale and ultimate location of storm ponds, school sites, and parks. We don't have that flexibility in zoning. And there's two parts to zoning that are really important in this conversation with respect to hardship. The first one is parkland is a requirement of the development approval process. Where one landowner is asked to dedicate more parkland than their share, which is 5% of the gross land area, they are to be compensated at fair market value. The key to zoning is that zoning establishes fair market value to a certain extent. So we have to make sure, we haven't got this quite right yet, but we will continue to work on it. We want to make sure that when fair market value is being considered, it's not being considered on the basis that it's a school site or a park, piece of parkland. So that will have an impact on how we do the zoning bylaw, because the zoning bylaw doesn't give us the flexibility. But we're certainly looking at that. The other thing is the distribution and how it affects individual landowners. Again, school sites have to be acquired by the school board at fair market value. So I don't think having the facility is necessarily a hardship if you're appropriately compensated. And the municipality has a significant role to play in that, in how you collect money for parkland, how the school board pays for school sites. So we're working on making sure that we're not affecting land value through the zoning. And in my mind, the flexibility in the secondary plan itself is sufficient to ameliorate the concerns that they won't be compensated, because the intent is that they are. Stormwater is a bit of a different story. Again, stormwater goes where stormwater needs to go. And yes, some landowners will be required to build a storm pond. That's an important part of developing a community. However, everybody needs to drain their property somewhere. So I would hope that there would be in place some compensatory program if somebody's draining their property into somebody else's pond, that there is some appropriate mechanism to compensate. So that's the goal. We're trying not to penalize people, but to make sure that they're appropriately compensated. In addition, in the allocation, the capacity allocation protocol, we would be suggesting that any density applied would apply to parks, schools, and storm ponds and can be shifted to adjacent properties. So it's a comprehensive approach. The goal is that there is no hardship, that everybody is treated fairly.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And then my final question is maybe just for clarification. If land was zoned deferred urban before, which, I mean, a good majority of it is zoned, were they ever given zoning expectations? Because it sounded like earlier they assumed it could be developed. Was that ever put in place, or was it always deferred urban and you would come to us and we would let you know at that time if that land could be built on?
Thank you for the question. My understanding of the deferred urban zone, which is before my time in LaSalle, is that the zone category was put in place to recognize that there could potentially be a development intention, but there needs to be additional study done to substantiate and warrant that intention. And one of those studies that was identified was a secondary plan. So at the time, after having, adopted a future secondary plan, at that time we would have the land use guidance in order to be able to rezone those deferred urban properties in keeping with the secondary plan.
Thank you very much. That helps a lot, actually. I don't have any other further questions, comments, and Councillor Burns?
You're saying deferred, but in all my years on council, was residential holding. Is that what you've referred to now as deferred? Because many people since 1991 who came with residential holding to this town were told at some point when the secondary plan comes in that they have the ability to develop those lots. And that's why the terminology, I'm a little bit confused.
Through you,
Thank
Madam Mayor. The phrase future residential is specifically not used. It is deferred urban, and that could include mixed-use development, residential development, urban parkland, urban stormwater management facilities, schools. So it's the intent of the deferred urban, as Gudrun said, that it would be subject to a secondary plan and subsequent rezonings to permit development in line with the zoning regulations that are in your zoning bylaw. So it's not future residential.
Thank you.
But in our old documents, 25, 30 years ago, whatever, for a long time, was R1 residential holding. And now we're taking that out in this new official plan and calling it deferred?
No.
So,
Councillor Burns,
so
we'll just
and the follow-up to finish that is, then what rights have you taken away from people who have that on their original land deeds and still own the property?
Just for clarification, deferred urban is what it is now. We're looking at making changes to that, but in the plan now, what's approved is deferred urban, and I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but that's already there.
Thank you.
That's correct. And my understanding is before it was zoned deferred urban, it was agricultural within the limit of the urban boundary. So in essence, through the rezoning, through the comprehensive rezoning exercise that Mr. Palmer did with prior administration, they took the land that was previously zoned agricultural and within the limit of the urban boundary and recognized it in the deferred urban category.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions and comments. Administration, is there anything you want to say to close? No?
Not necessarily. We appreciate the feedback. We look forward to working as a team to compile the comments and get back to what we've heard and advancing the process.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate everyone attending tonight. I know these meetings can be a little bit long, but it's extremely important to get public feedback and for us to be able to create a plan that makes sense for everyone. And I think two things I heard tonight that are extremely important was responsible growth and a complete community. And those are the two things that I think really are our focus of the secondary plan. And, you know, I was sitting here thinking what makes LaSalle, and it was trails, parks, natural areas, recreation areas, and then our beautiful developments that include a mixed use of residential as well as commercial that allow us to make sure that we really do offer a complete community. This is the future of our town. This is a very big, significant development that's going to determine where we go in the next 25 to 30 years. So I do appreciate everyone's input because I think it's very important that that helps us create that future development. There is a recommendation here. Like I said, there's no decisions being made, but there is a recommendation that the report of the Director of Planning and Development dated October 10th, 2024, and corresponding presentations by the Planning Partnership regarding the draft Howard Bouffard Secondary Plan and implementing zoning bylaw be received, and that Council receive the public, stakeholder, and agency feedback regarding the official plan amendments, draft Howard's Bouffard Secondary Plan and implementing zoning bylaw, and direct administration to summarize the feedback and how it has been addressed and report back to Council when the official plan amendments, secondary plan, and zoning bylaw are brought back for adoption. That is the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Richo Spagnolo, support by Councillor Carrick. All in favor? It carries. No one opposed. And I think that's all we have for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Meeting adjourned.